Summit. The panel will talk about the benefits and risks of Asia's growing shared economy, co-working and co-living services, and their impact on personal, finance, efficiency, security, and sociability of inhabitants. So let's call our moderator, Mr. Ben Hamley, Asia Pacific Lead, Future of Work, JLL. We have Archawat Chareonsilp, Chief Strategy Officer, HUBBA, Thailand. Catherine Ainsley, Global Head of Partnerships, Stasher. Mario Berta, Chief Executive Officer, FlySpaces. Mich Go, Head of Public Policy, Southeast Asia, AirBnB. And Sigrid Zialcita, Chief Executive Officer, Asia Pacific Real Estate Association.
Well, thank you everyone, and welcome to the Sharing Economy panel. My name is Ben Hamley. I'm the Asia Pacific lead for Future of Work at JLL, and I have the unenviable task of having one of the biggest panels of the day. So we're going to have a great conversation, and I'm hoping that if you do have any questions that we're able to address them, or you're able to perhaps interact with some of our speakers after this panel as well. As you heard in the introduction, the sharing economy is actually one of the most interesting topics today for a number of reasons. There are a number of different businesses that have emerged in the past decade since this term has risen to fame, one of which we're lucky enough to be joined by a representative of today from AirBnB. We're founded in the same year that the term sharing economy was first used. And so the conversation we wanted to start with is really how this evolution has taken place, where it started from, what's driving it, and potentially what it means for the future of real estate, for the future of work, and as we've heard so often throughout today, the human experience of people in those spaces. So without any further ado, what I might do is actually introduce each of our panelists so they can give you a brief overview of what it is they're currently working on. So we might start with you, Mario.
Okay. I'm Mario Berta, CEO and founder of FlySpaces. We are the biggest booking commercial platform of Southeast Asia. Technically, we are a brokerage. So we transact commercial real estate in the 5 countries and 12 cities where we operate. And we standardize and democratize the way people look for commercial leasings.
Thank you. Catherine from Stasher.
So yeah, Stasher is a luggage storage platform. So we connect travelers with hotels and shops where they can store their luggage. So very much tailored towards Airbnb guests, but also people attending venues and events, anywhere you can't take your bag in. So we're in 250 cities on 5 continents at the moment. Bangkok was actually our 100th city, excitingly. And we're really excited to expand further into Asia in the next year or so.
Hello, my name is Om. I'm a Chief Strategy Officer for a company named HUBBA, the first co-working space in Thailand. We also own and operate Texas Global Summit, which is the Thai tech conference. This year, we've grown to become one of the Asia's biggest tech conference. My role in these 2 companies is a Chief Strategy Officer, not aside from Chief Strategy Officer, I also drive their corporate innovation unit. So I help a lot of corporate clients to innovate faster, better, and hopefully a little bit more cost effective.
Hi everyone, my name is Mich and I'm from AirBnB, which is a community-driven travel platform, like offering stays and experiences for people who are traveling or even people who are from a certain city. As part of the policy team here at AirBnB, I've been spending a lot of time in Southeast Asia talking about sustainable travel and about the sharing economy and about how countries can leverage both of those things to drive greater economic growth.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sigrid Zialcita. I run the Asia Pacific Real Estate Association. We are a trade group based in Singapore and also in 8 countries. And today I'll be representing the investor point of view. Hopefully we'll get a good conversation going here, Ben.
Yeah, I think so. It's certainly a very diverse point of view that we've got on this panel, which I hope you can appreciate. And I think the best way to access that is to think about perhaps over the time since this term, the sharing economy, has risen to fame. What have been the primary things that have changed in that time? Mich, maybe you'd like to address that. From Airbnb's perspective, you started in stays and are moving into experiences, and there's a broader platform business model underneath that. What have you seen from your point of view?
Yeah, so I think as Ben mentioned, we started about 10 years ago, and since then, we've seen that travelers have really been asking for and demanding for a different type of travel. So people are looking for more immersive types of experiences. They're looking for different types of things when they travel. So now when they go somewhere, they don't just want to go to main tourist attractions, and they don't just want to stay in a space. They want to make sure that when they are staying somewhere, they are getting a local perspective, and they're getting immersed in the local culture. So we started out with stays, and I think that really has formed the foundation of our business. But because of this insight that people want more immersive experiences, we've also extended our business into the space of experiences, which essentially are very bespoke activities that are offered by local people. And I think really that has changed the way that a lot of people have traveled. And it's also, I think, importantly, changed the way that people think about entrepreneurship and about being a host. So.
That's a really good point. I think the connection between what we call the sharing economy and something else that we call the gig economy is quite a strong one. In fact, sometimes it can get a bit confused. We were talking about this just before. Given that you work in a business that is primarily a co-working business, but you work in a strategy role that helps companies to transform their business models and do all sorts of types of approaches to innovation. What sort of a connection is there between that evolution of the sharing economy and the business models that drove it and the gig economy, or this notion of entrepreneurship?
Right. I'm an economist by training, so I think sharing economy is the new form of economy, which will eventually grow to become the mainstream economic structure. Which means that whatever business that you are in, you need to be able to figure out how can you play in that kind of sharing economy paradigm, right? A lot of us think that sharing economy is something new, even though maybe it's 10 years old, but something new, something is not yet here. But if you take a life of a friend of mine named John, for example, right? John is maybe a graphic designer, right? He get a call from a client that he got approached from Fast Work, an app where they match freelancers with the clients, right? He hop on hop cars, right, to meet with his clients for lunch meeting, and at lunch, right, he was served by this company called Kin Khao, which is a co-cooking space where they can provide you with more than 1,000 menus for lunch catering. After that, he came back to a place like HUBBA, which is a co-working space, right? He's done his work, and then in the evening, he booked a table at the place called from the platform called Eat With, right? So he can go have dinner with Miss Ma'am, who he has never met before in his life, right? But through these examples, sharing economy is already here in Bangkok, like it or not, right? Whether or not you are in space operation business, whether or not you're in restaurant business, whether or not you're in automobile business, you need to be able to figure out how to play in this type of economics paradigms.
Yeah. And Catherine, Stasha is a business model that really emerged on the back of other business models in the sharing economy. Can you tell us a little bit about how Stasha identified this new opportunity and what it is you do?
Yeah, definitely. So we have two co-founders. They both studied at Oxford, and as they were finishing, one of them moved to London near one of the major train stations and realized so many people kept asking him if they could leave their luggage here. They were staying at Airbnbs, they were going to events. So he thought, actually, if you guys have this problem, loads of people must have this problem, set up a basic website where people could store luggage in his apartment. Obviously, operationally quite difficult, wasn't sure when he would always be home. Also realized that local high streets were being squeezed. Hotels were obviously struggling from the rise of Airbnb, so thought, what if we used those locations, drove significant ancillary revenue to them while also helping the traveler? So I think you're definitely right that it's definitely, like you said, companies kind of need to adjust to it, and it's definitely something that our hotel partners are grateful for. And
you're really identifying like one of the core patterns, I suppose, of the sharing economy, an underutilized asset that you can generate some more revenue on by perhaps putting a technology layer over the top to enable that. Sigrid, from an investor's perspective, what is the typical portfolio like, and how's that changing? Are you seeing investors use more technology to change the type of asset, or are they looking to introduce co-living, co-working types assets within that?
So what we're seeing now, Ben, what's interesting, I think the last 2 years, so investors today across Asia, the preference is still your traditional assets. So office, always a top choice. But what is interesting is that we have seen a number of investors, whether South Koreans, Singaporeans, I would say, actually these two countries, there is an increasing propensity to invest in alternative assets, as we call them. So for commercial real estate, this can be a variety of things. But for obviously the panel here, what's relevant would be the co-living and also the co-working spaces. And the touch points here, I would say, very relevant, in terms of the housing. Co-living came about when rents have been going up quite dramatically in many places. And this have been very pronounced in Hong Kong and Singapore, where everybody knows, obviously, the rents there are just like way, way up, right next to London, or even New York City. And so for a lot of the new cohort, the younger people, let's say the millennials, and there is clearly an affordability issue, and this asset came about because of that. But there is also a shift because of a preference. A lot of the younger people today like to have this community type of environment. It's so different as opposed to just renting. So one of the speakers a while ago said, or panelists, saying like an 8 square meter apartment, you're by yourself, right? I mean, the co-living can also be very tight quarters, but it's a community. So that's one asset that I think is quite interesting. Not every market, obviously, it's viable, right? But co-working is another one, obviously. It's very popular.
Yeah, I think that notion of community more broadly has certainly underpinned the whole sharing economy movement. And the expectations that come with that from a consumer perspective bleed very quickly into the expectations you have in work and the way that you work. And Mario, I suppose in your business, what it sounds like you're doing is actually capitalizing on the expectations that people have from their consumer experiences and giving them a much more seamless way of transacting and occupying commercial real estate.
So if I can just take a step back on the overall sharing economy, I think the one major role that the sharing economy is doing is working on, in business school we call it blue ocean. You guys familiar with blue ocean strategy? That's your kind of strategy. Red ocean, when you try to penetrate an existing market, so you gain market share. Blue ocean, you create a market where there is no market. Stash, perfect example. I mean, notoriously like Uber multiply by a tremendous number of X people that now are taking private transportation. Female, for instance, in the Philippines, were not taking taxis because they were not feeling safe. Now, through Grab and Uber and so on, they are taking way more taxis. So I think sharing economy is totally creating a blue ocean strategy. And us operating initially in the flexible office space and now commercially in a more broad term, we are converting customers, I mean SMEs and enterprises that will ultimately take a conventional office space. We are bringing them into flexible. We sit down, we were discussing in the preparation of the meeting, we sit down with small and medium enterprise and says, look, if you have a 5-people company, 10-people company, 15-people company, it makes no sense for you anymore to rent a conventional office space. You need to deal with the utility provider and fit out office space and so on, right? Now you have plug-and-play solutions like HUBBA or hundreds of brands that we have in across Southeast Asia. And if you go, no, if tomorrow business is doing well, you double the staff, then you just add an additional room. Right, so again, we are working much more on the blue ocean strategy here. And a lot has to do with educations, right? So companies like WeWork, for good or for bad things, is a great partner of ours, educate the whole market. Now, corporation, not in their dreams, will ever looked at flexible office space before. Now, co-working is widely adopted.
Yeah, I think the pursuit of those customer needs and what it is you discover when you start to change the way that value is created often creates secondary markets, creates new ways of being an entrepreneur, using that platform, creating secondary income streams or the gig, for lack of a better term. And Catherine, you were talking about the sort of evolution from now where you've started and you've created a market for space that was just underutilized in existing assets. Where do you see the future for a business like Stasher? How does it evolve from where it is now?
So I think the next step is definitely growth. So like I said, across Asia, but also from there, we have a lot of data about our customers. So we know that they're storing from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at a certain place. Luggage storage isn't overly interesting, but what we're doing is giving them their day back. So from there, can we recommend an Airbnb experience? Can we recommend other things that they can do with their time? Or if they're staying at, say, an Aqua Hotel, one of our partners, can we do a bundle that is brunch, a swim, a gym? So great value add for the hotel to make extra revenue, but also the customer has a great last day instead of sitting in a coffee shop.
Mich, from Airbnb's perspective, I'm sure you know a lot about customers as well, right? You'd be amassing quite an amazing database of people's travel and preferences and experience, participation. And I suppose the question becomes, do you think that that is going to be even more disruptive to the tourism industry in the future, or do you see another way of cooperating with those traditional operators in that space?
I think if you look at, so I think just step back a little bit. I think what's interesting about travel now is that people are not traveling just to travel or just to see a place. I think there's now a very strong intersection between travel and work. So with the rise of class of people like digital nomads, I think it's basically driven a lot of things like longer term stays, and that's why you see things like co-living start to arise as well. So our hosts have really responded to that, and we know that year on year we've seen a 40% increase in the supply of long-term stays on the Airbnb platform globally. So I think it's not just that consumer preferences are changing. I think the nature in which people are traveling is different as well. But I think to go back to your question, we've always believed that in order for our business to succeed, we need to work cooperatively with everyone. So we've been working closely not just with government and with regulators, but also with travel associations, business associations, and incumbent players to help them see the potential that they could also see on our platform. Like we've seen lots of more traditional hospitality players also come onto the Airbnb platform and to also use it as a means of marketing their properties. And I think it works especially well for smaller boutique type properties that would typically have found it a little bit harder to market their place. And I think the kind of like local and immersive and design-oriented nature that these properties have is highly aligned with our brand as well.
And Mario, as you said, it's like you're creating a better channel to educate customers and almost change the way that their expectations are fit to whatever proposition you're bringing in. Through HUBBA's lens on that comment that Mich made around digital nomads and I guess the changing nature of mobility and work in some of the emerging cities, Chiang Mai in Thailand and others around Southeast Asia, what sort of impact have you seen from the coal face, as it were, in growing these markets and being a participant in that growth?
Right. I think the digital nomads is quite interesting. At HUBBA, we have 4 or 5 locations now, 2 of which are dominated by digital nomads. At our headquarters in Ekamai, I think 80% of our customers are digital nomads and growing, right? I think Thailand was, out of the top 5, preferred locations for digital nomads. I think number 1 is Bali. Number 2 is Bangkok. Number 3 is Phuket. Number 4 is somewhere. Number 5 is Chiang Mai, right? So out of 5, top 5 preferred location for digital nomad, Thailand has 3 of them, right? So there's a lot of them coming. The government also really helping out by relaxing the visa requirements. So I expect more of them to come, right? From policy perspective, I think it is good for Thailand because Thailand is a country that's known for a lot of things, a lot of good things, but not R&D, right? By having a lot of digital nomads who possess a lot of know-hows, especially on creative economies, digital economies, interacting like we see at HUBBA with local entrepreneurs, local startups, right? We can only see that this interaction, between the twos are creating a kind of communities that serving, the sharing activities, right? Sharing economy is not limited to sharing product and services, but also sharing experience and knowledge, right? So I think it is thriving, and with the current policy that's more relaxed now for digital nomad, I expect more of them to come.
Yeah, and I suppose as those entrepreneurs start to develop different kinds of businesses themselves within those platforms and those businesses that you're running, they're actually going to need to interact with different policy operators, government agencies, the cities themselves in different ways too. I wondered, from the perspective of it, like capital flow, Sigrid, what do you see in terms of the opportunity for cities to play a more active role? We heard earlier that there's this notion of a city as a platform. Charles was talking about that type A model of curating people, almost such that the city becomes the shared platform. Do you think there are any locations around Asia that are investing in that approach in a different way?
So right now, the appetite for that, I would say it's still not there yet. You know, there are investors, I would say, that would delve into that, but the share is very small. And I think just having these options crop up, and I do agree, I think this has to be done in conjunction with a lot of the city governments and, you know, multiple players in the industry. The reason being is this. A lot of the investors will only put into established opportunities. Our part of the world is still considered obviously very opportunistic, and there are other options or available options outside of this location. So if you have governments working with a lot of the players, let's say in Bali, Chiang Mai, or some of these secondary locations, that means that the infrastructure can be built. And that means all of the ancillary services can also come about and make those locations viable, and afterwards also make them also attractive to many investors. Because I would see it's still quite a challenge when it comes to drawing or having to attract capital when it comes to those in those types of assets and locations.
Yeah, and Mario, something you mentioned before, which I thought was quite an interesting idea, is that in many ways your business is a barometer for economic growth, because while co-working and co-living is at a consumer level an interesting trend, at the big level it's really only incrementally valuable. And where your company has found a sweet spot is in that slightly larger office space. So where you're investing, where you're showing up, are you seeing the types of businesses coming through change, or what are you seeing in terms of the evolution of that?
You want the joke of the chicken processing company, right? Yeah.
Chicken processing. Yeah.
So
tell me about that.
We were discussing this before. So we see a variety of businesses, like I mentioned before, and now we have very traditional businesses that are looking at co-working as their sole office. So an example I mentioned to them before was we have a chicken processing company, literally they produce chicken, and their plant is outside Jakarta, but their commercial office is in one of our co-working space. And I think in the world of flexible office space is really divided in two. The co-working spaces like HUBBA, which are predominantly focused on digital nomad and solo entrepreneur, but then we have a variety of brands like, let's say, Common Ground out of Malaysia, which are really focused on corporate, right? So the world is really divided in two. Like the co-working spaces that in big cities, Bangkok is a unique case, 23 million people a year travel here, but a co-working space in Manila or Singapore that is focused, this business model into solo entrepreneur will die. There's no questions about it, right? So when we train landlords into how they should design the flexible office space structure and project, is like scale. I mean, the bigger is the space, the better, because you need toilets, pantry, and reception for 1,000 square meter or 3,000 square meter. There is no difference, right? So you have a lot of underutilized space you cannot actually sell or rent, like the toilets or the pantry and the meeting rooms, which you need them regardless of the size of your space. So scale, number one. Number two is target market, like focusing on small and medium enterprises. That's really where the money are. It's a question of mathematics. A solo entrepreneur maybe will rent a desk for a month, maybe not the next month because he's traveling somewhere else. A corporation will sign a 6 months, 12 months contract and will bring in 10 people. So you multiply that by 12, right? So it's really just a matter of money. And also the locations is very important. The co-working spaces with a higher occupancy rate are all in the CBD area. Of course, Chiang Mai, Bali, Phuket, it's a different target market. But the highest occupancy rate in the best co-working spaces in Singapore, Manila, Ho Chi Minh, Bangkok are all in the CBD area because that's where people work. That's where infrastructure are accessible, the metro system in your case, in Manila we don't have it, and so on. So these are key metrics that you need to look at when building your co-working space strategy.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about this, I guess, duality of co-living. Right? It seems like it's the more recent of the co-iterations, but in fact, there's been a version of co-living which has been around for a lot longer, and perhaps is going to be one of the more dominant and more lucrative ones as our countries get older. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think co-living is a fantastic subject because I just can't live in the same house with somebody else that I don't know. It's not as easy as sharing a ride. But I think I can't speak for other countries, but I can speak for Thailand. If you look at Thailand, right, you are looking at a country where, if you're talking Bangkok or any big cities, right, the housing prices are getting more and more and more expensive. The macroeconomic outlook for the next few years is not that great. The government has just issues a new requirement that you need a larger size down payment before you take on the mortgage. You have a younger generations, the millennials and Gen Z, who's do not feel passionate about owning a home, rather just give me a place to stay. So if you put all this dynamics, right, that is happening right now, that will have a huge impact on real estate development industries, right? My family is a small time real estate developer, so small that they don't invite it to come to this event. But I like to freak my mothers out. Said, Mom, or your land bank, this may not be as valuable as you think, right? Mom, in this business, it's no longer about you build something and somebody buy because they want to live or they want to have a house. They all still want to have a house, but how they're going to get a house is very different. And it's very difficult, and also difficult for them, right? If you put the startup hats on, that is the problem statement. That is the pain point, right? I think there's huge opportunities for real estate developers to figure out those pain points of your future customers. And if you can figure it out and you can come up with, the new models of how residential can be secured beyond just, buy and pay and lease and rent, that's huge opportunity. And the last one I want to say is that, the growing older populations, who can afford buying, but the young one who cannot afford. I think this dynamic are worth looking into, and as to how can you put these two group of people together and put a little bit of new business thinking around how we can help these two groups address their residential requirements, because the older ones can buy. They're probably not going to live there very long because they are very old. The younger one cannot buy, but they need to live there for a long time, right? So how can you work around this dynamics and come up with the business model in which you can serve the needs of these two people who require the residential the most, I guess, that our opportunity.
Yeah, and it would be remiss if we hadn't touched on the fact that in any sharing economy conversation, you sometimes realize that there are two sides of the platform, really. There's a side which is very appealing for a business customer in the sense that they can reduce the capex, shift it to operational expense, and therefore no longer need to occupy real estate for a long period of time, fit it out, or do any of the work that a company like FlySpaces might be able to help them with. But then on the consumer side of the coin, if you go all the way down that rabbit hole of access over ownership, maybe you no longer accumulate assets at all. And at some point, that creates perhaps an economic disparity. Do you have any thoughts on that, Sigrid? What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to see consolidation of capital from the people who already own the assets? Or is there an opportunity for Airbnb to help people buy homes?
Buying homes? Well,
that's a curveball, that last one.
it's a curveball. But let me just, I've been giving this some thought, our discussion here. But one thing that I would like to obviously emphasize, our assets today, in the past, you can have a building, let's say 15, 20 years old, without having to do anything, maybe a little bit of refurbishment, but that cannot happen today because you've got shifting preferences. at the same time, I think here the one common theme that I hear is about high prices and high rents. And so if you have that, there are substitutes. And so if you have a co-working space, for example, rents in Singapore, in Hong Kong, I mean, in many places of Asia, they're all at, I would say, at peak levels today. So if you were an entrepreneur, and even a lot of the corporations, as you mentioned about the CapEx, very high, co-working becomes a viable option. And so what we're seeing today is that, which is quite interesting, is that a lot of the developers are incorporating that into the whole design. And so now it's kind of common to hear developers say, I'm going to allocate about 10% of our space to co-working. Now, but that co-working is not a generic thing. There is a theme. Who are you going to be targeting when it comes to for that space? Because it can be a specialized one. And in Singapore, Hong Kong, you gotta do that because you are competing with many, many players, right? But it's really kind of changed a lot of the whole planning and the development cycle, I would say. And the other thing too that people need to be aware of, the longevity of any asset today is so much shorter. So the way we look at assets, you can't look at it from a static standpoint. You do need to hear what Mich is seeing in the marketplace. I mean, these are real trends. A demand for the luggage, how it's impacting hotels and can also be impacting the office assets. And so there are several real touch points across commercial real estate. So the way owners today look at the assets is how do they actually look at every space that they have? Because right now there's a lot of underutilized space, parking spaces, parking garage, with a lot of this, the proliferation of Grab and Uber and, multiple options. An owner today would think, do I really need 2-3 floors of parking allocated for parking space? Should I convert that into co-working facility or something else, or retail? But retail too, I would say, with Grab or other companies delivering your food, of whatever your options are, I mean, do you really need 10,000 square feet of retail today for your restaurant? Or is it just 1 or 2? So these are some of the questions. We don't have a definitive answer, but definitely the way we look at the asset, it's every owner today is very cognizant of these trends.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point you raise because it really seems like what these business model shifts have done has changed the way we think about real estate from a physical thing to an experiential thing, and something that really draws on a whole ecosystem around the urban environment to make those experiences possible. We are out of time, but before we leave, what I'd like to get is a final thought from each of our panelists. And I want you to, I guess, reflect on the conversation that we've had and think about perhaps next year's summit. What might we be talking about if the trajectory of real estate as an experiential asset develops even further? Mario, maybe start with you.
I think ultimately money are in the assets, so we follow the money, at least I do. That's what I will do.
Talk to Mario.
Yeah,
absolutely.
talk to me, I'm the money guy. Because I'm Jew, probably, right? But the best part is adding technology to the asset. So if you to your asset today, you're making 6-7%, right? With technology on top, you can either optimize processes or get in more customer or have your stickier customers, and your 6-7% become 12-14, right? So that's something that we are also exploring. Same like we have a bunch of co-living, which in the Philippines are, they take the form of dormitories, right? This guy bought the land, built the building, already designed for dormitories, but then they know that in 5 to 10 years, Philippines will have a middle class. They will take out the bulk beds and put in a queen bed, and now you have co-living, right? So, but the money are in the asset. So that's my final comment.
Catherine?
I think exactly what Sigrid said. In the future, people are starting to think more about, I've got this space, how can I best use it? And obviously luggage storage is a perfect example of that, not just in making money through the luggage, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, but your cheapest customer acquisition channel. So if you have a restaurant or a co-working space or a hot desk or anything that we can bring the customer in, and that's an automatic money stream, but then from there, how can that customer have a good experience?
Okay. I usually don't make any forecasts, anything beyond a few hours, because I often wrong. But
what
maybe,
would you
maybe
like
not.
to talk about next year then?
Next year when we come back, you know, if you pay a little bit of attention on these sharing economies, right? All the sharing economies that are successful, whether or not it's Airbnb or Ubers or whatever, or Stashers, right? It's always based on platform, right? I will never, you know, rent my house or my car to somebody who's a totally stranger without a platform. Right? For real estate developers in this group, you already have that platform. It's called houses and condos, right? How can you convert that? How can you, digitize that and really, really, speed up or accelerate, how the real estate folks can really join, the sharing economy faster. I hope that, next year, if I'm invited back as a small players, I like to hear some of those.
And Mich?
Yeah, I think for me, like what stood out throughout this whole conversation is that there clearly is a demand for shared spaces, shared experiences, shared working spaces. I think sharing is clearly a thing that everyone understands that is something people want to do. I think maybe for next year, what might be interesting also is if we can get maybe perspective from government or perspective from regulator about what they think about this and how they are also responding to changes and evolution in this space.
That's a very subtle suggestion. But thank you very much, Sigrid. I hope you don't mind. I think you made some very good points which triggered that flow of reflections. And they've removed your microphone anyway.
I think everyone had good ideas here. And so maybe one other thing that I would suggest, I think sustainability is one area that we probably need to look at. And this is not just like green buildings or smart cities, okay? It can be wellness and a lot of these concepts, obviously, that are relevant to the sharing economy experience. I think it should be something that we need to be aware of. And what are the touch points when it comes to our assets, whether at home or even on the commercial side? Thank
Fantastic.
you.
Please give a big round of applause for our panelists. And if you do have any other further questions, I'm sure they'd be happy to speak to you in the break.